In certain birds, green feathers, big G, are dominant to yellow feathers, little g, and long beaks, big L, are dominant to short beaks, little l. Two birds that are heterozygous for both traits, big G, big L, little l, produce offspring. What percentage of offspring will have genotype big G, big L, big L? So the first thing I want to do is make sure I understand what genotypes I'll be using in the cross. This tells me that two birds that are heterozygous for both traits produce offspring. So that means that both of the birds will have the genotype big G, big L, little l. Now, if you're not paying attention and reading this closely, you might just grab the genotype that shows them being heterozygous for both traits and the genotype that they list at the very end. But that last genotype is part of the question. It's asking what offspring will have the genotype big G, big L, big L. That's not one of the parents. That's asking about the offspring. So you have to be very careful when you read these questions that you're reading them correctly and you don't just go grabbing for genotypes, okay? So now that I understand the genotypes I'm using, I can make my Punnett squares. Two traits means two Punnett squares. My first Punnett square will be for feather color, and they're both heterozygotes, so one across the top, one down the side, and then I can fill it in. And my second Punnett square is for beak length, and they're both heterozygotes for that. So now I can look at my question. What percentage of offspring will have genotype big G, big L, being homozygous dominant for both traits? So I'll look at my first Punnett square, and I can see that 25% of the offspring are expected to be homozygous dominant for feather color because one box is big G. In my second Punnett square, there's one box that's homozygous dominant for beak length, big L. So that's also 25%. And this is where you have to be careful. When you see 25% from both Punnett squares, sometimes students just assume that, oh, the final answer must be 25%. But that's not how it works. In order to get the final answer, I have to take the percentage I get from each Punnett square and multiply them together. You always have to multiply. So 25% times 25. When you put that in your calculator, you'll put 0.25 times 0.25. And the answer you should get is 0.0625. And you'll move that decimal twice and see that 6.25% of the offspring would be expected to have both the homozygous dominant genotype for feather color and the homozygous dominant genotype for beak length, being big G, big L. So 6.25% is our answer.